They say the greatest betrayals are between lovers. But what if the betrayal begins with a daughter and ends with a shattered family? My name is Rita. People used to envy the life I lived. Big house, beautiful parents, private school, vacations to Europe, designer shoes before I turned 15. From the outside, I was the definition of a spoiled suburban dream. But the truth? The truth was something that would never fit into a pretty frame. It started with a look. Not from a stranger. Not from a boy at school. From my father. I was 18. No longer a child, but not quite a woman. My mother was always away, busy with charity events, yoga retreats, and brunches with women who wore diamonds like war medals. That left me alone with him. My father.
Fred.
He was tall. Commanding. Always wearing that crisp suit and the faintest scent of expensive cologne and Triumph. He worked in finance, but to me, he always felt like a king in exile, restless, regal, and unreachable. Until the day he wasn't. I began to notice it during breakfast. The way his eyes would rest a beat too long when I walked into the kitchen in a t-shirt. The way his voice would drop slightly when he asked how I slept. At first, I brushed it off. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was projecting my own confusion. But deep down, I knew something was shifting. I felt it like static in the air, like a storm just beyond the horizon. One evening, I came downstairs wearing one of his button-down shirts.
Just that.
I pretended it was accidental, like I grabbed it because mine were still in the dryer. He was sitting on the couch, reading a book, glasses on, face unreadable. I walked past him slowly, grabbed a soda, and sat down next to him, letting my legs curl beneath me. The air was thick. So thick I could barely breathe.
He didn't look at me.
Not at first. But I felt his body tense. You should go change, he said, voice tight.
Now.
And I should've. God knows I should've. But instead, I tilted my head and asked, do you think I look good in it? That was the moment. Not the one where everything broke, but the moment where we both stood on the edge of the cliff and stared down together. He didn't answer. He just stood up and walked to the other room. I could hear his breathing from the hallway.
Shaky.
Rattled. And for the first time in my life, I realized I could undo someone just by existing. I became addicted to that power. The next week, while my mother was away at her weekend spa retreat, I poured wine, picked a movie, dimmed the lights, and invited Dad to join me in the living room. He hesitated, sat stiffly at first. But after half a glass, his posture softened. Halfway through the movie, I leaned into his shoulder, heart pounding. You smell like when I was little, I whispered. His arms shifted slightly behind me, not touching, just hovering, as if he was waiting for the universe to give him permission. It never did, but I did. The moment didn't explode. It crept. It was a whisper, not a scream. A slow collapse of boundaries wrapped in candlelight and red wine. When the movie ended, I poured him another glass. My hand brushed his knee. He didn't flinch. He didn't move. And in the silence between us, 1,000 unsaid things screamed at once. I miss you, I said. I'm right here.
No.
You're not. He looked at me then, really looked, and in his eyes, I saw the storm he had been trying to bury for years. We both leaned in, like planets caught in each other's gravity. I don't know who crossed first. I just know we met in the middle. It was a kiss. Not long. Not wild. Just real. And it broke the world open. He pulled away, breathless, horrified. This can't happen, Rita. It already did. He stood, shaking. Your mother. She's not here, I whispered. But she would be. The next morning, he couldn't look me in the eyes. Neither could I. But the damage was done. And neither of us knew how to undo it. We didn't talk about it. We didn't touch. But we existed around it. Lived inside the bubble of what we had done. The weight of it hung between us like humidity before a hurricane. Then it happened again. This time, it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a slip.
It was a choice.
He came home from work late. Mom was out with her friends. I was in the kitchen, barefoot, wearing one of those thin tank tops that barely passed for clothing. I played music. I pretended not to notice him watching me from the hallway. But I felt him. The air shifted.
Heavy.
Electric. He stepped inside. You should be in bed. I smiled. So should you. I turned. He didn't move. And neither did I. This time, he didn't walk away. He crossed the kitchen.
Slowly.
Deliberately. Until there was nothing between us but breath. He reached out and I let him. The world fell silent. It wasn't lust. It was need. Sad, aching, desperate need. For connection. For attention. For someone to look at us like we were still human. We collapsed onto the living room couch.
Not
Passionately. Not violently. Just quietly. It was like watching two people try to piece themselves together through each other's skin. I remember looking into his eyes and seeing the same thing I felt. This is wrong. But we didn't stop. We didn't know how. The next morning, I woke up before him. My mother was still asleep. The house was silent. I stared at myself in the mirror. I expected guilt. I expected shame. But what I felt was power. Terrible, absolute power. The days that followed were strange. Almost normal. We talked less. Moved less. But when no one was watching, we'd find each other. In passing glances. In brushed fingertips. In lingering silences. But she noticed. My mother. She wasn't stupid. She started skipping her yoga classes. Canceled a retreat. Asked questions she never used to ask. I tried to act like nothing had changed. But everything had. And then came the moment we couldn't hide. We were in the kitchen. I reached for something. Too close. Too familiar. My fingers grazed his.
she saw.
It was a second. Maybe less. But she saw everything. Her eyes darkened. She didn't say a word. But I knew. We were no longer hiding a secret. We were being hunted by it. That night, Mom didn't sleep in her room. She stayed on the couch, silent, still, staring at the ceiling as if trying to listen through time. Dad avoided her. I pretended nothing happened. But the silence between the three of us wasn't just quiet. It was suffocating. Something had shifted. Something permanent. 3 days passed. Then a week. Then everything collapsed. It was a Sunday afternoon. Dad and I came back from the store, laughing, something stupid I said in the car. Light-hearted. Carefree. We stepped inside. Mom was sitting in the kitchen, still in her church clothes, hands wrapped tightly around a cold mug of coffee. Her eyes didn't move as we walked in. She just said one word. Sit. We froze. I felt my heart thud once.
Twice.
Then silence. Dad sat. I followed. Then, in the calmest voice I'd ever heard from her, she asked, "Rita, are you in love with your father?" The world cracked. A glass didn't shatter. A plate didn't drop. But something inside me broke. Dad stood up so fast his chair screeched. "Don't do this, Helen."
No.
"You did this," she said, eyes never leaving mine. "Both of you." I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't form. They were too twisted, too toxic to pass through my throat. Dad tried to explain, mumbling about guilt, confusion, timing, grief. But none of it mattered. Mom stood, walked away. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She packed 2 bags in silence and walked out the front door. She didn't even slam it. That was the part that hurt the most. For days after, Dad and I barely spoke. We were ghosts passing in daylight. The air in the house changed. The walls felt closer. The ceilings lower.
He stopped eating.
He barely slept. I tried to fix it, to make dinner, wear his favorite perfume, talk to him like before. But he was already somewhere else. One night, I found him in the den, staring at an old family photo.
Me.
Him.
Mom.
At the lake. I was 11. He whispered, without turning, "What have we done?" I didn't answer, because I didn't know anymore. A week later, I woke to the sound of a suitcase being zipped. I walked into the hallway. He was by the door, eyes red, posture rigid. "I'm going away," he said, "to get help." For what? For being someone I swore I'd never become. I laughed. bitter, broken. So that's it? You just walk out? After everything? He nodded. I lost your mother. I can't lose myself too. He left. Not with anger. Not with regret. Just emptiness. I stayed. In that big, cold house. Alone. No calls from Mom. Only silence. Dad sent postcards. Always short. Always signed Fred. Not Dad. And me? I wandered through those rooms like a queen in a dead kingdom. I used to feel powerful. Now I just felt haunted. Weeks passed. The house was no longer a home. It was a graveyard of echoes, of whispers, of broken laughter, of sins too heavy to bury. I stopped wearing perfume. Stopped brushing my hair. Some mornings I couldn't even get out of bed. The silence pressed down on me like a punishment. I told myself I didn't need them. I had always been strong. Always in control. But I wasn't. For all the power I thought I held, I was just a girl. A girl who destroyed the people who built her. One afternoon, I found an old photograph tucked inside a drawer in my father's desk.
We were standing by the lake.
Mom had her hand on his back. I had my arms around them both. We looked happy. But I could see it now, how much of that joy was forced. How many shadows had already started forming behind our smiles. I tore the photo, and for the first time in weeks, I cried. Now I live here alone. I walk past their empty rooms like they're sealed tombs. Dad sends the occasional postcard from his treatment center. Always distant. Always formal. Like a stranger trying to remember who he used to
be.
Mom? I haven't heard from her since the day she left. I don't blame her. Sometimes I sit in the den, where it all began, where I leaned too close, said too little, meant too much. I trace the couch with my fingers and wonder, if I had stopped, would he have stopped too? But deep down, I know the answer. We didn't stop because neither of us wanted to. And that's the truth I'll carry forever. They say a wall can be repainted, but the rot underneath? It stays.
This house still stands.
But it's not a home. It's a monument to what we ruined. Some nights, I still hear the echo of her footsteps, or his voice whispering my name in the dark. But there's no one there. Only me. Only silence. This wasn't just a story of forbidden love. It was a story of how I let the fire in and watched it consume everyone who loved me.